Hello, and welcome to Around the Political World with John Rothman. I am your host, John Rothman. If you're a fan of the show, make sure to hit the follow button on the top right of Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you are listening at this very moment. When you hit follow, leave a review or share an episode with a friend. It helps other people discover the show, keeps us going. As I like to point out, each and every day, it expands our base. We are now 6 months and 1 day into Donald Trump's second term as president. I will say to you what I have said before. Donald Trump's presidency is perhaps the most consequential presidency in modern time. We have seen changes dramatically in domestic policy, foreign policy, and certainly in the way the presidency is conducted. We have also seen a revolutionary moment in terms of Congress, unwilling to stand up to the president, that is, the Republicans in Congress, unwilling to stand up to the president, and a Supreme Court that seems subservient. I want to speak today about an issue that is of paramount concern to me: academic freedom. And the question of the case being heard today before the United States Supreme Court on the question of academic freedom, the question of Harvard University, and the question of whether or not the president has the power to impose what he has imposed on a great American university. Let me explain that I teach at the Fromm Institute at the University of San Francisco. And let me be clear, if anybody told me what I could teach or how I could teach it, I wouldn't be teaching. I believe in freedom of expression. I have believed that since I was a kid. Growing up in Northern California at the time of the free speech movement in Berkeley, Mario Savio, John Rothschild, and the others, it occurred to me that even though I might disagree with what they say, or even the tactics they use, the idea of the absolute integrity of a university was to me sacrosanct. I want you to understand clearly that the administration is using, at least initially, the question of anti-Semitism on the campus as a starting point for its decision to cut funds. As a Jew and someone who believes strongly in fighting anti-Semitism or Jew hatred with every fiber of my being, I can tell you that what Donald Trump is doing is not that. Donald Trump is interested in retribution. Those who oppose him, those who oppose his policies, need to be opposed vigorously. And indeed, if cutting off research funds is something that he feels he can use as a tactic to bully a university into submission, Donald Trump will do it. And that, to me, is where the problem lies. In order for a university to function, you need to have freedom. You need to have funds for research. The fact that Donald Trump has cut research funds is astounding to me. I remember when Richard Nixon was president and the question of impoundment came up. Could a president unilaterally impound funds appropriated by Congress? In those days, the Supreme Court said, no, that is not possible. But the question today is whether or not Donald Trump's decision to impound funds, whether that will survive the ultimate legal test. This is my plea for academic freedom. It doesn't mean that I approve of every action a university takes. It does not mean that I believe that protesters at universities are always sincere and dedicated. But I believe that their right to defend themselves, the right to protest, the right to express opinions, should never be infringed upon. In 1935, the prospective Republican candidate for President of the United States and Governor of Kansas, Alfred M. Landon, who was a Republican, was invited to introduce the socialist leader, Norman Thomas, as Thomas gave a major speech in Kansas. It was Alf Landon who stood before the assembled crowd and said, "I may not agree with what he says, but I will defend to the death his right to say it." Governor Landon was right, and subsequent Republican presidents, or candidates for president, have been equally emphatic. Wendell Willkie defended Schneiderman in the case of whether or not a communist should be expelled from the United States, and Willkie won. There was once a time when the Republican Party stood foursquare for independence and the right to expression. S.I. Hayakawa, who later went on to be a United States Senator, was first a professor and then president at San Francisco State University, then known as San Francisco State College. But Hayakawa, who opposed violent demonstrations, became a great defender of free speech. This, to me, is the critical question before the Supreme Court. And the power of a president of the United States to simply impound funds is something that should disturb us all. It is true that Donald Trump has now served 6 months and 1 day in the presidency of the United States. It is also true that Donald Trump is exercising powers of the presidency as no president has ever done before. I took some criticism from many of you for saying that Donald Trump received an A in his efforts to remold the presidency and to implement his policies. I also indicated that did not mean that I agreed with him. Let me, as my old boss Richard Nixon would have said, let me be perfectly clear. We cannot afford to have a president who is vindictive and who uses the levers of power as he wishes in such arbitrary fashion. Did you hear his latest on Truth Social on the question of renaming the Washington Commanders to go back to their old name, the Redskins? And did you hear what Donald Trump said? Because the stadium would be built on federal land, he'd interfere. He is demanding that the team rename itself. Let me be clear, a president of the United States has much to concern himself with. But these kinds of threats and bullying tactics are beneath the office of the president. And no president, liberal or conservative or Trump, should have the power to bully the way Donald Trump has been using his power of late. Thanks for tuning into another episode of Around the Political World with John Rothman. I am John Rothman. Make sure to follow along and let me know your thoughts on the show by leaving a review on Apple Podcasts and sharing an episode with a friend or colleague so we can continue to grow and expand, which, of course, is our goal. You can interact with me on Facebook, on LinkedIn, and of course you can email me directly. Your interaction with me is always appreciated. And now a special note of thanks to Gogo Zoger, the wonderful producer of Around the Political World with John Rothman. I want you to understand, Gogo understands freedom of expression. Never once has she said to me, "John, you can't talk about this or that." Quite the contrary. Because we believe in freedom of expression, well, that's why we are here. I am John Rothman. You are listening to Around the Political World with John Rothman, and I will be back tomorrow, and I can't wait to be right here with you. Have a great day.